Picture this. You're 15 years old, your hands are shaking, and you're standing in the most expensive room in all of Flanders. The air smells like crushed minerals and walnut oil, and one wrong move could cost more than your family makes in a year. Welcome to 1450, where becoming a painter wasn't about artistic vision or creative expression. It was about surviving your first day without destroying a fortune in materials or getting kicked out of the most exclusive club in medieval Europe. The workshop buzzes with activity before dawn even breaks. Master painters move between easels like generals commanding armies, their apprentices scurrying behind them, carrying precious cargo. But this isn't your typical medieval job training program. These workshops were essentially luxury factories, producing artworks that cost more than entire houses. And our nervous apprentice? He's about to discover that learning to paint in the 15th century was less like art school and more like handling live explosives while blindfolded. The guild system controlled everything. Every brush stroke, every pigment mixture, every technique had rules written in blood and enforced with the kind of medieval bureaucracy that would make modern tax collectors weep with envy. Getting accepted as an apprentice meant your family had connections, money, or both. The waiting lists stretched for years, and the dropout rate was higher than a modern medical school. Why? Because apprentices weren't just learning to paint pretty pictures. They were mastering chemistry, metallurgy, and business practices that could make or break entire family fortunes. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. These workshops weren't just churning out religious art for churches. They were creating the world's first luxury brand items. A single painting could cost as much as a nobleman's estate, and the techniques they developed were so closely guarded that industrial espionage was a real concern. Masters would literally take their secrets to the grave, rather than let competitors learn their methods. If you're enjoying this glimpse into medieval art history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. And definitely drop a comment about what you found most interesting about these medieval workshops. Did you know about the guild system, the insane cost of materials? Or maybe you're surprised by how business-oriented these artists really were. Let me know what caught your attention. Our apprentice's day starts at 4 in the morning, not with coffee and checking emails, but with the sound of his master sharpening tools and checking yesterday's work. The workshop operates on a schedule tighter than a Swiss watch, and every minute counts. Materials are expensive, daylight is limited, and customers are demanding. There's no time for artistic temperament or creative blocks. The first task sounds simple enough: preparing a wooden panel. But in the world of 15th century painting, simple doesn't exist. The poplar wood has been seasoned for years, selected grain by grain for its stability. Our apprentice runs his hands over the surface, feeling for imperfections that could ruin months of work. Every tiny bump, every slight warp in the wood needs to be identified now, because once the painting process begins, there's no going back. The sizing mixture bubbles in a pot over the fire, filling the workshop with the smell of heated animal glue. This isn't craft store glue we're talking about. It's made from rabbit skin, carefully prepared according to recipes passed down through generations. The apprentice has to get the temperature exactly right. Too hot, and it'll crack as it dries. Too cool, and it won't penetrate properly. Either mistake could cause the entire painting to fail months later, after hundreds of hours of work and a fortune in materials have been invested. As he brushes the warm sizing onto the wood, the apprentice can hear his master explaining colour theory to a more advanced student. But this isn't about artistic expression. It's about chemistry and economics. Every pigment has specific properties, mixing behaviours, and most importantly, costs. Ultramarine blue, made from ground lapis lazuli, costs more per ounce than gold. A single mistake mixing this pigment could bankrupt a workshop. The chalk gesso comes next, applied in thin coats that must be absolutely uniform. This white ground layer will determine how every color applied on top will appear. Too thick in one spot, and shadows will look muddy. Too thin somewhere else, and highlights won't shine properly. The apprentice applies coat after coat, sanding between each application with pieces of shark skin. His fingers are white with chalk dust, and his back aches from bending over the panel for hours. But here's what's really happening behind the scenes. While the apprentice focuses on his technical tasks, the master is running a complex business operation. Contracts with wealthy patrons specify exactly which pigments can be used, how much gold leaf will be applied, and even which saints will appear in which positions. These aren't artistic decisions, they're legal obligations. Breaking a contract could result in lawsuits, guild sanctions, or complete financial ruin. The workshop operates like a medieval assembly line. Junior apprentices prepare materials. Senior apprentices handle basic painting tasks. Journeymen work on complex details. And the master handles the most critical elements: faces, hands, and anything involving the most expensive materials. It's a hierarchy based not on artistic talent alone, but on the economic value of what each person can be trusted to handle. Around mid-morning, the atmosphere changes. Someone's approaching the workshop, and it's not a regular customer. The guild warden has arrived for his inspection, and suddenly everyone's moving a little faster, standing a little straighter. These weren't friendly social visits. Guild wardens had the power to shut down workshops, confiscate materials, and destroy careers with a single negative report. The warden examines everything. Are the apprentices properly registered? Are the correct guild marks being applied to finished works? Most importantly, are the workshops following the strict regulations about materials and techniques? Using inferior pigments while charging premium prices wasn't just fraud. It was a betrayal of the entire guild system that protected everyone's reputation and livelihood. Our apprentice watches nervously as the warden inspects his gesso preparation. The surface must be perfectly smooth, with no brush marks, no bubbles, no imperfections whatsoever. The warden runs his finger across the surface, checking for texture. He holds it up to the light, looking for variations in thickness. This isn't art criticism. It's quality control at the highest level. The economic pressures are incredible. A typical painting might take 6 months to complete, during which time the workshop has to pay for materials, wages, and rent without any income from that particular piece. If something goes wrong halfway through the process, the entire investment is lost. There's no insurance, no backup plan, no safety net. Success or failure depends entirely on technical perfection and business acumen. The warden moves on to examine the pigment storage. Each precious powder is kept in carefully labeled containers, organized by cost and rarity. The most valuable pigments are literally locked away, brought out only when needed, and measured with scales more precise than those used for gold. The warden checks the inventory records, making sure every grain of expensive material is accounted for. But the real tension comes from the competitive nature of the business. Workshop masters guard their techniques jealously, but they also need to prove their superiority over rivals. When the warden asks to see examples of recent work, it's not just an inspection. It's an opportunity to demonstrate why this workshop deserves the most prestigious commissions. The apprentice continues his careful work, now transferring a detailed drawing onto the prepared panel. This process, called pouncing, involves poking tiny holes along every line of a master drawing, then dusting charcoal powder through the holes onto the white ground. Every dot must be perfect, because this will guide all the painting that follows. One misplaced line could throw off the entire composition. As the charcoal dust settles onto the gesso, revealing the ghostly outline of what will become a magnificent painting, the apprentice realizes he's participating in something much larger than art. This is manufacturing at the highest level, combining technical precision with creative vision to produce objects that will outlast empires. The master appears at his shoulder, examining the transferred drawing with the intensity of a military strategist. Every line is analyzed, adjusted, perfected. This isn't about artistic inspiration. It's about meeting exact specifications agreed upon in detailed contracts. The patron has paid for specific elements in specific positions, and delivering anything less than perfect adherence to those requirements could result in legal action. But there's something magical happening too. As the apprentice watches the master work, correcting tiny imperfections in the transferred drawing, he begins to understand that technical perfection and artistic beauty aren't separate things. They're the same thing. In this world, you can't have one without the other. The afternoon brings the real magic, and that's when our apprentice discovers what separates medieval workshops from everything that came before or after. The master begins grinding pigments, and suddenly the room transforms into something resembling a medieval chemistry lab crossed with a treasure vault. Each pigment has its own personality, its own demands, its own potential for disaster. The ultramarine blue, worth more than most people's houses, requires grinding for hours to achieve the perfect particle size. Too coarse, and it looks grainy and cheap. Too fine, and it loses its brilliant intensity. The apprentice watches as the master works the grinding stone in careful circles, checking the consistency every few minutes, like a chef perfecting a sauce that could bankrupt kingdoms. But here's where it gets really wild. The red lake pigment comes from crushed insects, specifically tiny bugs called kermes that live on oak trees. Thousands of these insects have to be harvested, dried and processed to create just a small amount of pigment. The apprentice learns that the most expensive red in their workshop literally comes from bug juice, and it costs more per ounce than silver. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is, except in this case, it's putting your money where your paintbrush is. The lead white pigment presents its own challenges. It's created by exposing lead sheets to vinegar vapors for months, creating a chemical reaction that produces the purest, most opaque white available. But here's the catch. It's also slowly poisoning everyone who works with it. The master shows the apprentice how to handle it safely, but safety in the 15th century meant not dying immediately, not avoiding long-term health effects. The grinding process itself is an art form that would make modern chemists weep with envy. The master demonstrates how different pigments require different grinding techniques. Some need to be worked slowly with minimal pressure to preserve their crystalline structure. Others require aggressive grinding to break down stubborn particles. The apprentice realizes he's not just learning to paint, he's learning to be a materials scientist without knowing what science is. The walnut oil used as a binding medium has been specially prepared, slowly heated and clarified to remove impurities that could cause the paint to yellow or crack over time. This oil will determine how the pigments flow, how they dry, and how they'll look centuries later. The master explains that different pigments require different oil preparations. Some need thicker oil, others need oil that's been sun-bleached for months. As the apprentice watches, the master begins mixing the first glaze. This isn't like squeezing paint from a tube and slapping it on canvas. Every mixture is calculated based on the optical properties of the pigments, the reflective qualities of the white ground beneath, and the specific effects desired in the final piece. It's like watching a medieval wizard who happens to understand color theory better than most modern art schools. The painting technique itself defies everything you think you know about art creation. Instead of painting in full color from the start, the master begins with something called an underpainting. A complete monochromatic version of the entire composition, painted in subtle greys and browns. This underpainting will determine the three-dimensional modeling and light effects of the finished piece. Every shadow, every highlight, every subtle transition is planned and executed before a single bright color touches the panel. The apprentice gets to help with the simpler areas, carefully applying thin washes of color over the dried underpainting. The technique requires a steady hand and infinite patience. Each glaze layer is transparent, building up color and luminosity gradually. Rush the process or apply the paint too thickly, and you'll create muddy, lifeless areas that can't be fixed. But the real drama happens when that patron arrives. The man who's paying for this masterpiece walks into the workshop, and suddenly, everyone's behavior changes. This isn't just a customer service moment. This is a negotiation that could determine the workshop's financial future. The patron examines the work in progress with the intensity of a jeweler examining diamonds, because essentially, that's exactly what he's doing. The conversation quickly turns to gold leaf, and the apprentice watches the master's face tighten. Gold leaf application is where workshops either prove their worth or destroy their reputations. The patron wants to know exactly how much gold will be used, where it will be applied, and how it will be finished. These aren't aesthetic discussions, they're economic negotiations where every square inch of gold represents serious money. The master explains the process while the apprentice prepares the materials. First comes the red bole, a special clay mixed with rabbit skin glue that creates the perfect surface for gold adhesion. The bole has to be applied in multiple thin coats, each one polished smooth with a soft brush. The color of the bole will affect the final appearance of the gold, creating either warm or cool undertones depending on the specific shade used. The gold itself comes in sheets so thin they're almost transparent, each one worth more than most people earned in a week. The apprentice learns to handle these sheets with a special knife, never touching them directly because the oils from human skin can damage the metal. Each sheet has to be laid down perfectly on the first try. There are no second chances with gold leaf. The application process requires perfect timing and environmental conditions. The humidity has to be just right, the temperature stable, and the workspace completely free of any drafts. The apprentice watches as the master breathes gently on the bole surface to create just enough moisture for the gold to adhere, then carefully lays each sheet with movements so precise they look choreographed. But here's where the real artistry emerges. Once the gold is applied and burnished to a brilliant shine, the master begins adding decorative details using tiny punches, metal tools with patterns carved into their tips. Each punch creates a different texture or design when pressed into the gold surface. The apprentice realizes that what looks like simple decoration is actually a complex system of symbolic meaning, with different patterns conveying specific religious or social messages. The punching process creates these amazing optical effects. Some areas of gold are left smooth and reflective, while others are textured to catch and scatter light in different ways. The master shows the apprentice how different punch patterns can make flat gold surfaces appear three-dimensional, creating the illusion of carved metalwork without actually carving anything. As the afternoon progresses, the apprentice begins to understand the rhythm of the workshop. It's not just about creating beautiful objects, it's about managing time, materials, and client relationships in a way that keeps the business profitable while maintaining the highest possible quality standards. Every decision has economic implications, but every economic decision also has artistic consequences. The most fascinating part is watching how the master balances these competing demands. When the patron suggests using less expensive materials in areas that won't be easily visible, the master has to weigh the immediate financial benefits against the long-term reputation costs. Cutting corners might save money today, but it could destroy the workshop's credibility for generations. The apprentice learns that reputation in this business isn't just about artistic skill, it's about trustworthiness, reliability, and consistency. Clients aren't just buying paintings, they're investing in objects that will represent their families for centuries. The pressure to create something that will still look perfect hundreds of years later adds a weight to every brushstroke that modern artists rarely experience. As the natural light begins to fade and candles are lit throughout the workshop, the apprentice realizes his first full day is nearly complete. The painting he helped prepare this morning now shows the first hints of what it will become. The careful preparation, the precise material handling, the methodical building of layers. It's all starting to make sense as part of a larger system designed to create objects of lasting beauty and value. But the day isn't over yet, and there are still secrets to uncover about how these medieval workshops operated. Secrets that reveal just how sophisticated and business-savvy these artists really were. The master pulls out a small vial filled with what looks like liquid amber. This is the final varnish, made from tree resins that have been dissolved in oil and aged for months. But applying varnish isn't like spraying clear coat on a car. This stuff is temperamental, expensive, and absolutely critical to the painting's survival. One mistake here can ruin months of perfect work, turning a masterpiece into an expensive disaster. The apprentice watches as the master tests the varnish consistency on a scrap piece of wood. Too thick, and it'll leave brush marks that will be visible for centuries. Too thin, and it won't provide proper protection. The master explains that this particular varnish recipe was developed by his own master decades ago, and he's made subtle improvements based on years of observation and failure. What's really happening here goes beyond simple protection. The varnish actually changes how viewers see the painting. It saturates the colors, making them appear richer and more vibrant. It creates a subtle depth that draws the eye into the painted surface. But here's the kicker. Different areas of the painting need different amounts of varnish to achieve the desired optical effects. The master begins applying the varnish with a brush so soft it's basically made from whispers and good intentions. Each stroke has to be perfect because dried varnish can't be removed without destroying everything underneath. The apprentice holds his breath as the master works, realizing that this moment represents the culmination of everything they've done today. But there's something else happening that the apprentice is only beginning to understand. While he's been focused on the technical aspects of painting, the workshop has been running a complex financial operation that would impress modern business schools. The master has been tracking material costs, labor hours, and client payments with an accuracy that puts medieval accounting practices to shame. Every pigment used is recorded in a ledger. Every hour spent on each project is calculated and assigned to specific clients. The workshop operates multiple paintings simultaneously, each at different stages of completion, creating a production pipeline that maximizes efficiency while maintaining quality. The apprentice realizes that becoming a master painter isn't just about artistic skill, it's about becoming a CEO of a luxury manufacturing operation. The guild system creates another layer of complexity that modern artists never face. Every finished painting has to be inspected and approved by guild officials before it can be sold. The guild mark isn't just a signature, it's a guarantee that the work meets specific technical and material standards. Workshops that consistently produce substandard work lose their guild membership, which effectively ends their ability to operate legally. As evening approaches, the workshop takes on a different atmosphere. The intense focus of daylight hours gives way to a more contemplative mood. This is when masters often work on the most delicate details, using candlelight to create dramatic shadows that help them see subtle modeling and surface textures that daylight might obscure. The apprentice gets his first lesson in working by artificial light, and it's nothing like he expected. Candles don't provide steady illumination. They flicker, creating constantly changing light conditions that require constant adjustment of technique. But experienced painters learn to use this flickering light as a tool, allowing them to see how their work will appear under the varying light conditions it will experience in churches and wealthy homes. The master demonstrates how different pigments behave under candlelight versus daylight. Some colors that appear brilliant in sunlight look completely different by candle flame. This isn't just an interesting observation. It's critical information for painters creating works that will be viewed primarily in candlelit environments. Churches don't have windows everywhere, and wealthy homes rely on candles and fireplaces for illumination. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The apprentice discovers that his master has been working on a personal project, A small painting that isn't for any patron, isn't governed by any contract, and isn't subject to guild regulations. This is pure artistic expression, the kind of work that reveals what these painters could create when freed from commercial constraints. The personal project uses experimental techniques and color combinations that would never be approved by conservative patrons or guild officials. The master explains that these experiments often lead to innovations that eventually find their way into commissioned works, but only after years of careful testing and refinement. Innovation in medieval painting wasn't about dramatic breakthroughs. It was about incremental improvements proven over time. The apprentice realizes that becoming a painter in this era means accepting a lifetime of constant learning and experimentation. Techniques that work perfectly with one type of wood might fail completely with another. Pigment mixtures that create beautiful effects in winter might behave differently in summer heat. Environmental factors that seem insignificant can have dramatic effects on finished works decades later. As the master adds final details to the day's work, he begins sharing stories about paintings that have gone wrong over the years. There's the commission that cracked because the wood wasn't properly seasoned. The portrait where the expensive ultramarine blue turned green because it was mixed with an incompatible pigment. The altarpiece that had to be completely repainted because the patron changed his mind about the saints to be included. These aren't just cautionary tales, they're case studies in risk management. Every decision in the painting process involves weighing potential benefits against possible failures. Using cheaper materials might save money initially, but could result in expensive repairs or complete replacement later. Experimenting with new techniques might create stunning effects, but could also destroy months of work. The business side of the operation becomes even more complex when the apprentice learns about the workshop's relationship with suppliers. Pigment dealers, gold leaf manufacturers, and wood suppliers all operate on credit systems that can make or break workshops. A single late payment or quality dispute can cut off access to essential materials, forcing workshops to either compromise their standards or refuse profitable commissions. The most successful workshops maintain relationships with multiple suppliers, creating redundancy that protects against supply disruptions. But these relationships require constant maintenance through social connections, prompt payments, and sometimes political maneuvering. The master explains that running a painting workshop means being part artist, part businessman, part diplomat, and part gambler. The apprentice watches as the master carefully cleans each brush, separating them by the type of paint they've been used for. Brushes contaminated with certain pigments can never be used with others, creating a complex system of tool management that rivals modern laboratory procedures. Some brushes are so specialized and expensive that they're used for only specific techniques and stored like precious instruments. The day's final task involves updating the workshop's records. Every material used, every hour worked, every technique attempted gets documented in detailed ledgers that serve multiple purposes. They track costs for pricing future commissions, provide evidence for guild inspections, and create a knowledge base for training future apprentices. But these records also serve as insurance against client disputes. When patrons complain about costs or question the quality of materials used, the master can produce detailed documentation proving exactly what went into each painting. In an era before consumer protection laws, reputation and documentation were the only defenses against false accusations. The apprentice learns that even the smallest details of workshop management have long-term implications. The way pigments are stored affects their longevity. The temperature and humidity of the workspace influences drying times and paint behavior. The quality of natural light available during different seasons determines which types of work can be done when. As the workshop prepares to close for the day, the apprentice realizes that he's witnessed something extraordinary. This isn't just traditional craftsmanship. It's a sophisticated system for creating objects of lasting value using techniques refined over generations. Every aspect of the process, from material selection to final varnishing, has been optimized for both immediate visual impact and centuries-long durability. The master extinguishes the candles one by one, leaving only enough light to safely secure the workspace. Paintings in progress are covered with clean cloths to protect them from dust and temperature changes. Valuable pigments are locked away. Tools are cleaned and properly stored. The workshop transforms from an active production facility back into a secure storage space for priceless materials and works in progress. But the apprentice's education is far from complete. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new techniques to master, and new insights into the complex world of medieval art production. He's beginning to understand that becoming a painter in 1450 Flanders means joining a tradition that values technical perfection, business acumen, and artistic vision in equal measure. The bell tower chimes the end of the working day, but the apprentice knows his real education has only just begun. As the workshop settles into evening quiet, the apprentice notices something that makes his stomach drop. Hidden among the gilded decorations he helped create today, the master is adding tiny marks that look almost like accidents. But they're not accidents at all. These are secret signatures, hidden symbols that identify the workshop's work to those who know what to look for. The master catches the apprentice's confused expression and pulls him aside. What he learns next changes everything he thought he knew about the painting business. Those innocent-looking decorative swirls contain coded information about when the painting was made, which apprentices worked on it, and even which specific batch of materials were used. It's like a medieval version of product tracking, except the products are worth more than most kingdoms' annual budgets. But here's where things get really interesting. The master explains that these hidden marks serve multiple purposes beyond simple identification. They're also a form of quality control that extends decades into the future. If a painting develops problems years later, these marks can trace the issue back to specific materials, techniques, or even individual workers. It's accountability at a level that would make modern manufacturers jealous. The apprentice watches as the master demonstrates different types of hidden marks. Some are worked into the decorative patterns so seamlessly that only trained eyes would ever spot them. Others are hidden in areas that will be covered by frames or mounting systems. A few are actually incorporated into the paint layers themselves, invisible unless you know exactly where to look and how to examine them. The most fascinating marks are the ones that change over time. The master shows the apprentice how certain pigment combinations will shift color slightly as they age, revealing hidden symbols that weren't visible when the painting was new. These time-release signatures serve as long-term authentication, proving a painting's authenticity decades or even centuries after it was created. This marking system represents something revolutionary for its time. In an era before mass production, serial numbers, or standardized quality control, these workshops developed their own methods for tracking and guaranteeing their products. Every major workshop had its own coding system, as closely guarded as military secrets, and passed down only to the most trusted members. The economic implications are staggering. A painting with proper workshop marks could be sold, resold, and valued with confidence for generations. But a painting without these marks, or with marks that couldn't be verified, might be worth only a fraction of its true value. The master explains that some wealthy collectors hire experts whose only job is interpreting these hidden signatures. The apprentice learns that the marking system also serves as protection against forgery. Copying the visible aspects of a painting is difficult, but possible. Copying the hidden marking system requires inside knowledge that forgers rarely possess. Some workshops deliberately spread false information about their marking methods to confuse potential counterfeiters. But the real genius of this system becomes clear when the master explains how it protects the workshop's reputation. If a painting bearing their marks develops problems, they can examine those marks to determine whether the issues result from their workmanship or from later damage or poor restoration attempts. It's like having a black box recorder for artwork. The marking process itself requires incredible skill and planning. The marks have to be integrated so seamlessly that they don't affect the painting's appearance or structural integrity. Some marks are added during the underpainting stage, others during color application, and still others during final varnishing. The timing and placement of each mark is carefully calculated to ensure it serves its purpose without compromising the artwork. The apprentice discovers that even he's been participating in this marking system without realizing it. Those seemingly random scratches he made while preparing the gesso surface. Some of them were deliberately guided by the master to create specific patterns. The way he laid certain brush strokes during his practice sessions. Those movements were chosen to leave subtle traces that trained eyes could later identify. This revelation changes how the apprentice sees everything about the workshop's operation. What he thought was simply creating beautiful art was actually a complex system of manufacturing, quality control, authentication, and brand protection that rivals anything modern businesses have developed. These medieval workshops were operating with a level of sophistication that most people never suspected. The master pulls out a magnifying lens and shows the apprentice details he never would have noticed otherwise. Tiny variations in brush texture that identify which specific brush was used. Microscopic particles of rare minerals that prove certain pigments were genuine. Even the way paint layers interact at their edges contains information about the workshop's techniques and timing. The apprentice realizes that becoming a master painter means learning to see at multiple levels simultaneously. The obvious visual level that patrons and viewers appreciate. The technical level that determines how well the painting will survive over time. And now this hidden level of coded information that serves the business and authentication needs of the workshop. But the marking system creates its own challenges. Apprentices have to learn not just how to create these marks, but how to keep them secret. The wrong person learning a workshop's marking system could use that information to create convincing forgeries or to discredit genuine works. Information security in the medieval painting world was deadly serious business. As the final candle flickers out and the workshop falls silent, our apprentice has learned something that goes far beyond painting techniques. He's discovered that the greatest masterpieces in history weren't created by lone artistic geniuses working in isolation. They were produced by sophisticated business operations that combined cutting-edge technology, international trade networks, and quality control systems that wouldn't look out of place in a modern factory. The paintings hanging in museums today represent not just artistic achievement, but centuries of accumulated business knowledge, technical innovation, and economic strategy. Every brushstroke tells a story of survival in one of history's most competitive industries, where technical perfection and business savvy were literally matters of life and death.